Diana Collins stared at her daughter's hands, quick, graceful patterns dancing in the air. Sitting at Gate 27 of Denver International Airport, surrounded by the Friday afternoon chaos of harried travelers, she felt a familiar twist of inadequacy in her chest. Sophie was signing something elaborate, not the simple hungry or tired that Diana had mastered long ago, but something layered with emotion and complexity that remained frustratingly out of reach. The 6-year-old's dark eyes, so like Diana's own, watched her expectantly. Diana pulled her phone from her designer handbag thumb, hovering over the ASL translation app. Before she could open it, Sophie's small shoulders fell slightly, the light in her eyes dimming. Diana recognized that look. Disappointment carefully masked for her mother's benefit. It cut deeper than any board member's criticism ever could. 6 years as CEO of Medisync, a healthcare software company valued at 9 figures, and Diana could navigate the most hostile takeovers, decode the most complex financial statements, anticipate market shifts before they happen. But she couldn't understand her own daughter without technological assistance. The irony wasn't lost on her. Technology was her life's work, creating software that bridged gaps in healthcare communication. Yet here she was, unable to bridge the most important gap in her own life. The boarding area buzzed with typical airport energy. Business travelers hunched over laptops. Families corralled overtired children, college students with oversized headphones bobbed to inaudible rhythms. To anyone watching, they were just another mother-daughter pair waiting for their flight to Montana. No one would guess at the gulf between them, wide as the Rocky Mountains they were flying toward. Sophie clutched her worn green turtle backpack against her chest legs, swinging beneath the chair. She'd had that backpack since preschool, refused every attempt Diana made to replace it with something newer, more age-appropriate. The fabric was worn thin in places, one strap carefully reinforced where it had torn last summer. Diana had repaired it herself, staying up until 3 in the morning, watching a YouTube tutorial with the sound off so she wouldn't wake Sophie. One of the few mothering moments when she'd felt completely competent. Movement caught Diana's eye. Sophie was signing again, slower this time. A question about time, Diana recognized that much, probably asking when their flight would leave. She glanced at the board, still on schedule. She signed 1 hour, carefully hoping that answered the question. Sophie nodded, but her expression remained serious, eyes darting around the terminal. She was worried about something else. The Montana trip had started as a desperate impulse somewhere between the third therapist's gentle suggestion that Diana meet Sophie where she is in yesterday's terse email from her lawyer. James was pushing for primary custody again, this time with affidavits from Sophie's ASL interpreter and 2 child development specialists. His words echoed in her mind. Communication barriers create emotional distance. Sophie needs a parent who truly understands her. As if James was any better. His approach to Sophie's deafness had always been clinical. Cochlear implants, speech therapy, the latest assistive technology. He'd learned the minimum ASL required, always believing science would eventually solve the problem. The irony that he now positioned himself as more connected to Sophie's needs wasn't lost on Diana. The flight to Whitefish had crystallized from desperation, 1 week away from everything. No interpreters, no assistants, no buffer between them. Just mother and daughter in Montana's wilderness, where words wouldn't matter so much. The thought terrified her more than any hostile takeover. A shadow fell across them, and Diana looked up to find a man standing nearby. 40-something with lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. Worn jeans, a faded flannel shirt under a practical jacket, work boots that had seen better days. Everything about him said, not from my world. The world of boardrooms and business class, of tailored suits and calculated risks. Yet something in his stance, a quiet confidence, commanded attention. But it was his hands that captured Diana's full focus. They were moving in fluid, confident ASL, not directed at her, but at Sophie. Not the careful textbook signs Diana had learned, but something more natural, more alive. Sophie's entire face transformed, lighting up from within. Her hands flew in response so quickly, Diana caught only fragments. Something about her turtle backpack, about a book about swimming. The man laughed, a genuine sound that made several nearby passengers glance over, and signed something back that made Sophie's shoulders shake with silent giggles. Diana felt that familiar twist in her chest tighten. When was the last time she'd made Sophie laugh like that? When was the last time they'd had a conversation that went beyond logistics and daily necessities? The man glanced at Diana, his smile softening into something that might have been sympathy. He switched to spoken English. I'm sorry, should have introduced myself first. I'm Mike Anderson. I noticed your daughter signing and thought I'd say hello. My daughter's deaf too. Diana extended her hand automatically, CEO instincts kicking in despite her inner turmoil. Diana Collins, and this is Sophie. Mike signed Sophie's name to the little girl, then added something Diana couldn't follow. Sophie nodded enthusiastically and signed back. Mike's eyebrows rose in what looked like appreciation. She says you picked her name because Sophia's mean wisdom in Greek, and you wanted her to be both smart and beautiful. Diana felt heat rise to her cheeks. She had said exactly that while once in the hospital room hours after Sophie was born, had repeated it to her newborn daughter countless times during those early months before the diagnosis. She hadn't realized Sophie remembered or that she'd shared it with others. Thank you. Are you traveling with your daughter? Mike shook his head, something flashing across his face, pride mixed with what might have been loneliness. No, Amy's back in Montana with her grandmother. I've been in Denver for work, heading home now. He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. Actually, I was wondering if you'd mind if I sat with you for a bit. The flight's delayed another hour, and it's nice to meet another ASL family. Amy doesn't get much interaction with other deaf kids where we live. Diana should have said no, stranger danger and all that. But Sophie was already patting the empty seat beside her, signing please with such enthusiasm that Diana found herself nodding. Of course, we'd love the company. Mike settled into the chair with the ease of someone comfortable in his own skin. Within seconds, he and Sophie were deep in conversation. Diana watched, trying to follow along, catching maybe one word in three. Sophie was telling him about school, her art class, something that happened at recess. Mike responded with the kind of attention most adults didn't give children, asking follow-up questions, reacting with genuine interest. At one point, he pulled out his phone and showed Sophie a photo. From her angle, Diana could see it was a young girl, maybe 7 or 8, with Mike's warm brown eyes and a gap-toothed smile, hands frozen mid-sign. Sophie's eyes widened and she signed something rapid and excited. Mike glanced at Diana, translating. She's asking if she can video call Amy, my daughter. They're both asking if they can meet. Diana felt that twist in her chest again. Sophie wanted to meet another deaf child so badly that she was asking through a stranger's parent. When was the last time Sophie had mentioned friends from school? When was the last time Diana had arranged a play date or asked about Sophie's social circle, beyond whether the interpreter said she was adjusting well? Of course, Diana said, her voice rougher than intended. That would be wonderful. Mike set up the call with the practiced ease of someone who did this regularly. Within moments, a little girl's face filled the screen, her eyes the same warm brown as her father's. She saw Sophie and immediately started signing, and Sophie signed back so quickly her hands were almost a blur. Mike held the phone steadily, occasionally adding a comment, but mostly letting the girls talk. Diana watched her daughter transform. This wasn't the careful, controlled Sophie she saw at home, the one who'd learned to be patient with her mother's slow signing, who nodded and smiled even when Diana knew she'd missed half the context. This was Sophie uninhibited. Sophie fluent, Sophie fully herself. Their conversation flowed for almost 15 minutes, covering everything from favorite colors to whether dragons could be pets to what they wanted to be when they grew up. Amy said something that made Sophie throw her head back in silent laughter, her whole body shaking with joy. Diana felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes and blinked them back quickly. When they finally said goodbye, Sophie sat back with a huge smile on her face. She turned to Diana and signed something elaborate, her expressions animated. Diana caught the signs for friend Summer in what might have been camp, but the rest was lost. She looked helplessly at Mike, who'd been watching the exchange with patient understanding. She's asking if she can visit Amy this summer, he translated. There's a deaf camp in Montana that Amy goes to every year. Sophie would love to go. He paused, then added carefully. She said she doesn't have any deaf friends at her school, just hearing kids who know some signs. The words hit Diana like a physical blow. Sophie's school had a deaf and hard of hearing program. That's why they'd chosen it, paid the exorbitant tuition. State-of-the-art equipment, certified interpreters, a small classroom of students who used ASL. But apparently program wasn't the same as community. Apparently her daughter had been lonely in ways Diana hadn't even noticed. I didn't know, she said quietly, more to herself than to Mike, about the friends. She never said anything. Did you ask? Mike's voice was gentle, but the question landed anyway. Diana opened her mouth to defend herself, then closed it. Had she asked, really asked, in a way that invited honest conversation? Or had she just checked boxes? School good, homework done, any problems? All questions that could be answered with simple yes or no signs. She definitely knew. She'd been conducting daily status meetings with her 6-year-old instead of actually talking to her. Her phone buzzed, breaking the moment. James's name flashed on the screen, accompanied by the third text message in the past hour. She silenced it without looking, but not before seeing the first line. If you get on that plane, I'm filing an emergency custody motion first thing Monday morning. Mike glanced at the phone, then back at Diana, his expression carefully neutral. Sorry, Diana muttered. My ex, he's not happy about the trip. The Montana trip? Diana nodded, surprised at how easily she was confiding in this stranger. He thinks I'm being impulsive. That Sophie needs routine and stability, not adventures. She didn't add the rest of what James had said, that she was compensating for guilt with grand gestures, that she should spend less time planning exotic vacations and more time actually learning to communicate with their daughter. That he was considering filing for primary custody because Sophie deserved a parent who could actually understand her. Mike made a thoughtful sound. Does Sophie like routine and stability? It was such a simple question that Diana almost laughed. Did Sophie like routine? She had no idea. Her daughter ate the same breakfast every morning, followed the same bedtime ritual, wore the same turtle backpack everywhere. But was that preference or just learned behavior? Was that Sophie being Sophie or Sophie being what she thought her mother expected her to be? I don't know, Diana admitted, and the honesty of it felt like failure. Mike didn't respond right away. He watched Sophie, who was now drawing something on her tablet, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only Diana could hear. My wife left when Amy was 2, said she couldn't handle having a special needs kid. He made air quotes around the phrase, his mouth twisting slightly. I was working in construction management back then. Big projects, bigger stress, impossible hours. I'd come home after Amy was asleep and leave before she woke up, convinced myself I was providing for her, that it was enough. He paused, his hands clasping and unclasping in his lap. Then one day my wife was just gone. Left a note saying she'd tried but wasn't cut out for this life, and since I was never home anyway, I might as well figure it out on my own. Diana stared at him, horror and sympathy warring in her chest. Mike, I'm so sorry. He shrugged, but there was old pain in the gesture. Best thing that ever happened to me, actually. Worst at the time, but best in the long run. He looked at his hands, calloused and capable. I quit the corporate job, became a hands-on builder. Flexible hours, enough money to get by, and I got to be there. Really there. I learned ASL like my life depended on it, because Amy's did depend on it. Her happiness, her sense of self, her connection to the world, all of it ran through these. He held up his hands, weathered from physical labor, but expressing something profound. I made mistakes. God, so many mistakes, but I learned that being present isn't the same as being there. You can be in the same room and miles apart. The words settled over Diana like a heavy blanket. She thought about her penthouse apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and carefully curated art, about Sophie's bedroom with every educational toy and adaptive technology money could buy. She'd built an empire and called it love. She'd confused providing with parenting. I've been present, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm there for breakfast. I check her homework. I sign what I can. Mike nodded slowly. I believe you, but can you tell me what Sophie's favorite color is? Diana's mind went blank. Green, obviously. The backpack, her bedroom walls, half her wardrobe. Green, she said with confidence. Mike smiled and signed something to Sophie, who'd looked up from her tablet. Sophie's hands moved in response, and she giggled silently. Mike looked back at Diana. She says her favorite color used to be green, but now it's blue like the ocean. She changed her mind 3 months ago after you took her to the aquarium. 3 months ago. Diana remembered that Saturday, a rare unscheduled day. She'd suggested the aquarium on a whim after canceling a business brunch. Sophie had been mesmerized by the jellyfish exhibit, pressing her hands against the glass, her eyes wide with wonder. Diana had taken photos, posted one to Instagram with a caption about quality time, then spent most of the visit responding to work emails on her phone. She hadn't noticed her daughter falling in love with a new color. Mike must have seen something in her face because he reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. Hey, you're here now. You're trying. That's what matters. But Diana wasn't sure that was enough. Trying felt like a participation trophy when Sophie deserved a gold medal parent. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she looked at the full message. If you get on that plane, I'm filing an emergency custody motion Monday morning. Sophie needs a parent who can actually communicate with her, and we both know that's not you. The hospital board is backing me on this. They've been trying to get MediSync's contract for months. This could all go away if you just reconsider their offer. Diana stared at the words until they blurred. The terrible thing was that James wasn't entirely wrong about her ability to communicate with Sophie. She could manage, she could get by, but she couldn't connect. Not in the way that counted. But the second part of the message that was new. The hospital where James worked as a neurologist had been aggressively pursuing a contract with Medisync for their new patient communication platform. Diana had resisted, concerned about their data privacy practices. Now James was openly admitting the connection between the custody battle and business interests. It was manipulation, plain and simple. Mike was saying something, but Diana's ears were ringing. She stood abruptly, mumbling an excuse about needing the restroom, and walked blindly toward the far side of the concourse. Inside the women's bathroom, she locked herself in a stall and tried to breathe. Just breathe. The walls pressed in, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere outside, a baby was crying, the sound muffled and distant. Diana pressed her forehead against the cool metal door and tried to remember why she thought Montana was a good idea. She'd imagined long hikes where words wouldn't matter, just shared experiences and natural beauty. She'd imagined hotel rooms with room service and movies with subtitles. She'd imagined somehow magically becoming the mother Sophie deserved just by changing location. But you couldn't outrun your inadequacies. You couldn't fix years of missed connections with 1 week in Big Sky Country. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from James, this one just a screenshot of a legal document with portions highlighted: custody evaluation parameters, communication assessment criteria. He wasn't bluffing about Monday. And maybe he shouldn't be. Maybe Sophie would be better off with a father who, whatever his faults, had at least been honest about his limitations. James had never pretended to be something he wasn't. He'd said from the beginning that he didn't think ASL was necessary, that technology and medical interventions were the future, that Sophie could live a normal life with the right support. Diana had fought him on it, insisted on ASL immersion, on deaf culture exposure, on raising Sophie to be proud of who she was. But she'd been a hypocrite. She championed ASL while never becoming truly fluent. She'd insisted on deaf community while never actually connecting Sophie to other deaf children. She'd built a philosophy she believed in and then failed to live it. A knock on the stall door made her jump. "Just a minute," she called out. The knock came again, more insistent. Diana wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and opened the door, ready to glare at whoever couldn't read social cues, and found Mike standing in the entryway to the women's restroom, looking deeply uncomfortable but determined. "You can't be in here," she said automatically. "I know, I'm not coming in." He shifted his weight, staying firmly in the doorway where he could speak to her but wasn't invading the women's space. "Sophie was worried. She saw your face before you left." Another woman approached, saw Mike, and backed away with a confused look. He stepped slightly aside to let her enter, then continued. "Look, I don't know what's going on, and you don't have to tell me, but that kid out there loves you. I've been watching her watch you, and she looks at you like you hung the moon. Whatever you think you're failing at, she doesn't see it that way." Diana laughed, but it came out harsh and broken. "She doesn't see it because she's 6 and I'm all she has. But she deserves better. She deserves someone who can actually talk to her, who understands when she's excited or scared or angry, who doesn't need a translation app for their own daughter." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Her father's right. I'm not enough. I thought I could be. I thought love and money and good intentions would be enough, but they're not. She needs someone fluent, someone present, someone who isn't me." Mike was quiet for a long moment. Another woman tried to enter the bathroom, saw him, and backed out quickly with a muttered apology. He barely noticed. "Can I tell you something about Amy? When she was 4, she asked me why I talked funny. Funny because my ASL was still rough back then. I was learning, but I wasn't fluent. I made mistakes, signed things backward, confused, similar signs couldn't keep up when she got excited." His eyes grew distant with the memory. "I had this moment of panic, thinking I was failing her, that she needed a deaf parent, or at least someone fluent, and all she had was me stumbling through. You know what she said when I tried to apologize?" Diana shook her head. She said, "Daddy talks with his heart. That's my favorite language." Something cracked in Diana's chest. Her voice came out thick with emotion. Sophie deserves someone who can talk with both their heart and their hands. Maybe Mike conceded, or maybe she just deserves someone who's willing to keep learning, to keep trying to show up even when it's hard. Kids don't need perfect, Diana. They need present. They need effort. They need to know they matter enough for you to struggle. He stepped back from the doorway, checking to make sure no more women were trying to enter. "That flight to Montana, that's effort. That's you showing up. Don't let fear or guilt or your ex-husband's threats convince you it doesn't count. He left before Diana could respond, slipping away with a murmured apology to a woman still waiting to enter. Diana turned to the mirror, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, designer blouse, wrinkled CEO armor cracking at the seams. She looked like someone who'd lost their way, or maybe like someone who was finally finding it. She washed her face, reapplied minimal makeup, straightened her shoulders, and walked back out to gate 27. Sophie saw her coming and her whole face brightened. She signed something quick and worried. Diana recognized okay and mom and something that might have been sad. She knelt down in front of her daughter's chair and signed slowly, carefully, using the words she knew for certain. I'm okay. I love you. I'm sorry. Sophie's small hands came up and she signed back with the kind of patience that broke Diana's heart. Slow, clear signs that her mother could follow. I love you too. Don't be sorry. You're here. Such simple words, such profound grace from a 6-year-old. Diana pulled her daughter into a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling the solid warmth of her small body. Sophie wrapped her arms around Diana's neck and squeezed tight. And for a moment, words didn't matter at all. When they pulled apart, Mike was sitting a polite distance away, studiously examining his phone to give them privacy. Sophie tugged on Diana's sleeve and pointed at her tablet. Diana looked. Sophie had drawn a picture, bright colors and careful detail. 3 figures standing together, a woman in a blue dress, a man in a plaid shirt, and a little girl with a green turtle backpack. Above them, Sophie had written in careful letters, "My new friend and his girl and me." That's beautiful, sweetheart, Diana said, signing the words as best she could. Sophie beamed and signed something else too fast for Diana to catch completely. She looked at Mike, who glanced over and smiled. She wants to know if you'll learn to sign faster, he translated, so you can keep up with her stories. She has a lot she wants to tell you. Yes, Diana said out loud, then signed it clearly, emphatically. Yes, I will, I promise. And this time she meant it, not as a box to check or a skill to acquire, but as a bridge to build a language to learn, not just with her mind, but with her heart. The boarding announcement crackled overhead. Flight 237 to Whitefish, Montana, now boarding all zones. Passengers began gathering their belongings, forming the usual chaotic line. Mike stood and extended his hand to Diana. Looks like we're on the same flight. Diana took his hand, felt the calluses earned through years of working with his hands, of building things with patience and care. Looks like we are. Sophie grabbed her turtle backpack and slipped her hand into Diana's free one. The 3 of them walked toward the gate together, an unlikely trio bound by circumstance and language, and the shared understanding that love sometimes means learning to speak in ways you never expected. As they boarded, Diana's phone buzzed one more time. James again, undoubtedly with another threat, another demand, another reminder of everything she was doing wrong. She silenced it without looking and dropped the phone into her bag. For the next week, she was unreachable. For the next week, she was just a mother with her daughter, learning to listen in the spaces between words. The plane lifted off into a Colorado sunset, golden light streaming through the windows. Sophie pressed her face to the glass, watching the ground fall away, her hands already moving in excited signs about clouds and birds and the tiny cars below. Diana watched her daughter's hands, really watched them, seeing not just movements but meaning, not just signs but stories. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't reach for her phone or mentally review her to-do list or any of the 1,000 distractions she usually hid behind. She just reached for Sophie's hand and held on. On the other side of the aisle, Mike caught her eye and nodded once, a small gesture of solidarity, of recognition, one parent to another saying, "You're doing it. Keep going." And Diana thought maybe, just maybe, she could. The flight attendant's safety demonstration began, complete with exaggerated gestures that made Sophie giggle. Diana leaned over and whispered into her daughter's hair. "I see you. I hear you in ways that have nothing to do with sound. I'm learning your language finally." Sophie couldn't hear the words, but she seemed to feel the vibration of her mother's voice, turning to look up with curious eyes. Diana repeated the sentiment in halting ASL, her fingers stumbling over signs she wasn't entirely sure of. Sophie's smile was worth every awkward attempt. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Sophie immediately began signing to Mike across the aisle, asking about Montana, about animals they might see, about Amy's house. Diana watched, not interrupting, letting her daughter communicate freely with someone who understood her completely. During a pause, Mike glanced at Diana. "She's asking if we live near bears." Diana laughed, the sound surprising her with its naturalness. "Tell her probably not, but we'll keep an eye out." Mike signed Diana's response, adding something that made Sophie's eyes widen with excitement. The conversation continued, Mike switching effortlessly between ASL with Sophie and spoken English with Diana, bridging their worlds with practiced ease. It was an arrangement that could easily have made Diana feel more inadequate, but instead she found herself studying their exchanges, mentally cataloging signs she didn't know. Watching the grammar structure, the way emphasis worked, the role of facial expressions. She'd studied ASL before, of course had the apps, the books, had even hired a tutor for a while, but she'd approached it like a business skill to master, not a living language to inhabit. Sophie pulled out her tablet and started showing Mike her digital art collection. Pride swelled in Diana's chest. Her daughter was talented, something she'd always known objectively, but was now seeing through fresh eyes. The compositions were sophisticated for a 6-year-old, the color choices deliberate, the subjects imaginative. When had Sophie become so good at this? Had Diana been too busy to notice, or had she noticed but failed to truly appreciate it? Mike complimented one drawing in particular, an underwater scene with jellies and fantastical sea creatures. "This is incredible," he signed to Sophie, his expression genuinely impressed. "You're a real artist." Sophie beamed, then signed something while pointing at Diana. Mike translated. "She says you bought her the good drawing program after the aquarium. She practices every night before bed." Another revelation. Diana had purchased the app on a whim after Sophie had shown interest in the interactive art display at the aquarium. She'd barely thought about it since assuming Sophie used it occasionally. Apparently, her daughter had a whole nighttime artistic ritual Diana knew nothing about. "I'd love to see more of your drawings," Diana signed carefully. Sophie's face lit up with surprise and pleasure. She immediately began scrolling through her digital portfolio, showing Diana piece after piece, dragons and forests, spaceships and castles, portraits of people Diana recognized from Sophie's life. It was like being given a key to a room in her daughter's mind that had always been locked. Each drawing told a story, revealed a preference, illustrated a dream. Diana had been living with a brilliant, creative, complex little person and somehow missing half of who she was. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence and Sophie grabbed Diana's hand instinctively. The small, warm fingers curled around Diana's, a gesture of trust that felt unearned but infinitely precious. They'd flown together before, of course. Business trips where Diana had brought Sophie along, vacations to Disney World and the California coast. But Diana realized with a start that she'd always seated Sophie by the window with her tablet and headphones, creating a comfortable bubble for her daughter, while Diana used the flight time to catch up on work. They'd been physically side by side, but mentally in separate worlds. This time, Diana left her laptop in her bag. She ignored the emails piling up, the Slack notifications lighting up her silenced phone. Instead, she turned towards Sophie, fully present, and signed, "Tell me about your drawings. Tell me everything." Sophie's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. An hour into the flight, the beverage service arrived. Sophie ordered her own drink, signing to Diana, who translated for the flight attendant. It was their usual routine, practiced and efficient. But after the attendant moved on, Mike caught Diana's eye. "Let her order directly next time," he suggested quietly. Most flight attendants know some basic signs, and if they don't, Sophie can point or type on her tablet. It's good for her confidence. Diana nodded, feeling simultaneously grateful for the advice and embarrassed she hadn't thought of it herself. She'd been so focused on making things smooth and easy for Sophie, for the staff, for everyone around them, that she'd inadvertently sent the message that Sophie needed mediation to interact with the world. The realization stung, but Diana pushed past the discomfort. This week wasn't about her ego or her feelings. It was about seeing Sophie clearly, perhaps for the first time. As the flight progressed, Diana found herself falling into conversation with Mike about their children's shared experiences. His story emerged in fragments, the early days after his wife left the desperate scramble to find childcare, while working the gradual shift from crisis management to intentional parenting. "I remember the first time I realized I needed to completely change my approach," Mike said, keeping his voice low as Sophie napped against Diana's shoulder. "Amy had this meltdown at the grocery store, full-on tantrum, and nothing I did helped. People were staring, judging. I was trying to sign, trying to speak, trying everything I knew, and she just kept getting more upset." Diana nodded, recognizing the scenario all too well. "This older woman came over, and I thought, great, another person telling me I'm doing this wrong. But she just knelt down next to Amy and signed something so simple, so perfect. 'I see you're angry. That's okay. Take a breath.' And Amy just stopped, looked at this stranger who understood her, who spoke her language. And I realized I'd been talking at her, not with her." The story resonated painfully. How many times had Diana done the same, issued directions, Checked boxes, moved through the logistics of parenting without really connecting. That woman changed our lives, Mike continued. Turned out she was deaf, herself raised 3 hearing kids. She became Amy's first deaf role model, started teaching me ASL the right way, not just vocabulary, but culture perspective, way of being. Made me understand this wasn't just about communication techniques. It was about identity. He glanced at Sophie, still sleeping peacefully. The hearing world wants to fix deafness, he said. But what if it's not something that needs fixing? What if it's just a different way of experiencing the world as valid as any other? The sentiment echoed Diana's own beliefs, the philosophy she championed during the early custody negotiations with James. She'd said these exact words to lawyers, to doctors, to James himself. But sitting there watching her daughter sleep, Diana had to confront an uncomfortable truth. She'd intellectually embraced deaf culture while emotionally keeping it at arm's length. She'd hired interpreters instead of becoming one. She'd advocated for Sophie's rights to ASL education while never fully entering that world herself. She'd been an ally in theory, but not in practice. I believe that, Diana said softly. I've always believed it. I just haven't lived it. Mike nodded, understanding in his eyes. It's easier to believe something than to embody it. Took me years to really get it, and I'm still learning every day. He shifted in his seat, turning slightly to face her. What made you choose ASL for Sophie? Your ex seems like he was pushing for the medical approach. Diana looked down at her daughter, at the dark eyelashes resting against her cheeks. The small hand curled trustingly around the sleeve of Diana's blouse. I did the research, she said simply. I read everything I could find. The statistics on language acquisition, the studies on emotional development, the long-term outcomes. The evidence overwhelmingly supports early language exposure, whatever that language is. Kids who get fluent language input from the beginning do better cognitively, socially, academically. She stroked Sophie's hair gently. But it was more than that. I went to this panel discussion at Gallaudet. 5 deaf adults talking about their childhoods, their experiences. The ones whose parents embraced ASL early, who grew up with that foundation. They were so confident, so whole. The ones who were forced into speech therapy only, who weren't given language access until later. They talked about feeling isolated, confused, like something was wrong with them. The memory of that panel had stayed with Diana through the years, through the fights with James, through the doubts that plagued her at 3 in the morning. I couldn't bear the thought of Sophie feeling that way. I wanted her to have pride, community identity. I wanted her to have language from day one, not years of struggle trying to access sound that might never be fully accessible to her. Mike nodded slowly. But you didn't fully learn the language yourself. It wasn't an accusation, just a quiet observation. Still, it cut to the heart of Diana's failure. I tried, she said, the inadequacy of those 2 words hanging in the air between them. I took classes, hired tutors. But then MetaSync got the Series B funding and everything exploded. 16-hour days, international expansion, board pressure. I kept telling myself I'd get back to it when things settled down. She laughed softly, bitterly. Things never settled down. Sophie stirred, blinking awake. She sat up, looking between Diana and Mike with curious eyes before signing a question to Mike. He signed back, then translated for Diana. She's asking if we're friends now. I told her I think we are. Diana smiled, signing yes directly to Sophie. The little girl beamed, then launched into rapid signing to Mike. He laughed. She says now we have to be friends forever because you need more deaf friends, and I'm the only grown-up she's ever seen who can make you smile when you're sad. The observation, so simple and so profound, took Diana's breath away. Had Sophie been watching her all these years, cataloging her moods, noticing which adults made her mother happy or sad? Of course she had. Children see everything, especially the things parents think they're hiding. The captain's voice came over the intercom announcing their initial descent into Glacier Park International Airport. Sophie peered out the window as the plane banked, revealing the first glimpse of Montana's rugged mountains. She signed excitedly, pointing at the snow-capped peaks. Diana glanced at Mike, who was watching Sophie with affectionate amusement. She's never seen mountains like this before, Diana explained. We've done beaches, Disney cities, never wilderness. You picked a good place then, Mike replied. Whitefish is about as close to heaven as it gets, especially this time of year. Early summer before the tourist crush. The trails will be open, but not crowded. Weather's perfect, wildlife is active. He hesitated, then added, Amy and I live about 20 minutes outside town. Small cabin, nothing fancy, but right on the edge of the forest. She'd love to show Sophie around if you're interested. There's a spot by the creek where we sometimes see deer in the evenings. Diana found herself nodding before she'd fully processed the invitation. Sophie would love that. The relief on Mike's face suggested he'd been nervous about offering. The idea struck Diana as incongruous, this capable, confident man, uncertain about extending a simple invitation. Then again, maybe single parenthood made everyone second-guess the simplest social interactions. "Great," he said, visibly relaxing. "Amy's been asking for a friend to show around. Gets lonely out there sometimes, even with her grandmother living with us." The plane descended through wisps of cloud, revealing more of the landscape below. Dense forests, winding roads, glittering lakes nestled between mountains. Sophie pressed her face against the window, utterly entranced. Diana's phone vibrated again as cellular service reconnected. She pulled it from her bag reflexively, then paused, seeing the cascade of notifications. 5 missed calls from James. 7 text messages. 3 emails marked urgent. The office Slack channel exploding with some crisis or another. For a moment, the weight of responsibility pressed down on her, the company she'd built from nothing. The employees who depended on her, the investors expecting continued growth. The instinct to dive in, to fix, to manage was almost overwhelming. Then Sophie tapped her arm and pointed out the window, signing big mountains, beautiful with wide, expressive movements. The pure joy on her face cut through everything else. Diana held the power button on her phone until the screen went dark. The company would survive without her for a week. Sophie needed her now. The plane touched down with a slight bump, taxiing toward the small terminal of Glacier Park International. As they gathered their belongings, Diana noticed Sophie signing something to Mike, her expression serious. Mike responded, then looked at Diana. "She's asking if we can all have dinner together tonight with Amy. She's worried you'll be lonely in a place where you don't know anyone." The concern touched Diana deeply, her 6-year-old worrying about her mother's social needs rather than the other way around. "That sounds lovely." She signed directly to Sophie, whose face lit up with surprise and joy at the direct communication. As they disembarked into the small, rustic terminal, Diana felt a strange sense of possibility. This wasn't the week she'd planned, a controlled mother-daughter retreat with scheduled activities and careful boundaries. Instead, they'd stumbled into something unplanned, unscripted, potentially messy. A week ago, that would have terrified her. Diana Collins, CEO, lived by carefully constructed plans and risk assessments. But standing there in the Montana airport, watching Sophie's animated conversation with their new friend Diana, found herself embracing the uncertainty. They collected their luggage and headed toward the rental car counters. Mike paused at the terminal exit, shifting his duffel bag to his other shoulder. "My truck's in the long-term lot," he explained. "Amy's grandmother is picking her up from summer program at 6, so we have time for an early dinner if that works for you. There's a great place in town, very kid-friendly, with staff who know some ASL." He pulled out his phone, navigating to a contact screen. "Here's my number. Text me when you're settled in your hotel and I'll send directions." "No pressure, though. I know you came here for mother-daughter time." Diana entered his contact information, struck by how natural this felt, making plans with another parent, creating space for their children to connect. Such a normal, everyday occurrence for most families. Why had she made it so complicated in her own life? She could almost hear her executive coach's voice. "You're overanalyzing again, Diana. Not everything needs a strategic plan and risk assessment." "We'll definitely see you tonight," she assured Mike. Sophie would be disappointed otherwise. "And so would I," she added, silently surprising herself with the realization. They parted ways at the airport exit, Mike heading for the parking lot, Diana and Sophie to the rental car shuttle. As they waited, Sophie tugged at Diana's sleeve, signing a question. "Is Mike your boyfriend now?" Diana laughed, caught off guard by the bluntness of childhood logic. "No, sweetheart. We just met. He's a new friend." Sophie considered this, then signed with the emphatic decisiveness of a 6-year-old. "He should be. He makes you happy, and he understands me." Out of the mouths of babes. Diana deflected with a smile and a gentle redirect, but Sophie's observation lingered as they boarded the shuttle. Was she really so visibly different around Mike? And was Sophie so starved for adults who understood her that she was already matchmaking? The shuttle delivered them to the rental counter, where Diana upgraded from her reserved economy car to an SUV better suited for mountain roads. As they drove toward Whitefish, Sophie gazed out the window, utterly captivated by the landscape. Pine forests stretched in every direction, punctuated by glimpses of distant peaks and occasional meadows bursting with early summer wildflowers. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to the lodge. Diana had booked a rustic but upscale resort nestled against the edge of the forest with views of Whitefish Lake in the distance. Sophie bounced excitedly as they checked in, barely containing herself until they reached their cabin. The accommodations were perfect, a two-bedroom cabin with a stone fireplace kitchen and private deck overlooking the woods. Sophie immediately ran from room to room exploring every corner before racing onto the deck to point out a squirrel darting up a nearby tree. Diana watched her daughter's excitement, realizing how rarely she saw Sophie this animated at home. Their penthouse was beautiful, certainly with its modern amenities and city views, but it didn't inspire this kind of wonder. Maybe there was something to be said for mountains and forests, for places where nature dwarfed human achievement. She unpacked efficiently, putting away their clothes and arranging Sophie's comfort items, the stuffed otter she'd slept with since infancy, the nightlight that projected stars on the ceiling, the familiar books they read together at bedtime. Routines were important, especially in new places. That much she'd learned from the parenting books. Once settled, Diana texted Mike to confirm dinner plans. His response came quickly, with directions to a restaurant in downtown Whitefish and a note that Amy was beyond excited to see Sophie again. Diana helped Sophie change into fresh clothes, then sat her down for a brief conversation, signing as clearly as she could. "I want you to know something important. This week is about us, you and me. I want to learn more about your world, your language. I want to be better at talking with you. Will you help me?" Sophie's expression turned serious, then blossomed into a smile so radiant it made Diana's chest ache. The little girl nodded vigorously, then signed slowly, deliberately, making each word distinct. "I will teach you. It's easy. You just have to watch with your heart, not just your eyes. Watch with your heart, not just your eyes." Diana wondered where Sophie had heard that phrase or if she'd created it herself. Either way, it captured something profound, something Diana had been missing all along. She pulled her daughter into a tight hug, whispering against her hair, "I'm ready to learn." As they drove into downtown Whitefish, Diana felt a strange blend of nervousness and anticipation. This wasn't a business dinner with clear objectives and power dynamics she could navigate instinctively. This was uncharted territory, a social evening with a man she barely knew, and his daughter in a town where she had no connections or reference points. For the first time in years, Diana Collins was completely out of her element, and oddly enough, it felt exactly right. The restaurant Mike had chosen was a local favorite, a timber-framed building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Whitefish Lake. A fire crackled in the massive stone hearth, despite the summer evening, lending the space a cozy mountain ambiance that immediately put Diana at ease. Mike and Amy were already waiting in the lobby when Diana and Sophie arrived. Amy spotted Sophie first, her small face lighting up as she waved enthusiastically. The girls immediately began signing at rapid speed, their hands dancing with the excitement of newfound friendship. Diana watched the exchange, catching fragments about the flight, the mountains, and Amy's grandmother's dog. The fluidity of their communication highlighted the stark contrast between their connection and her own halting exchanges with Sophie. Mike stood slightly apart, giving the girls space to reconnect. He'd changed from his travel clothes into a simple button-down shirt and jeans, casual but put together. The attire suited him better than Diana would have expected, softening his weathered edges without disguising the capable strength in his frame. He caught her watching and smiled, a slight hint of self-consciousness in the gesture. "Cleaned up okay for a construction guy," Amy insisted I change. "Said I couldn't wear my work clothes to a fancy dinner with Sophie's mom." Diana glanced down at her own outfit, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater she'd packed as her most casual option. Even her relaxed wardrobe screamed corporate executive. The hostess approached her, smile widening when she spotted Amy. She signed a greeting that made both girls giggle before leading them to a corner table with an unobstructed view of the lake. Diana noticed that the staff seemed familiar with Amy greeting her with the easy affection reserved for regulars. As they settled in, a server appeared with children's menus that included both written descriptions and simple ASL illustrations for common items. Another thoughtful touch that Diana filed away, wondering why she'd never encountered such accommodations in Chicago's high-end restaurants, despite her generous patronage. Sophie and Amy studied their menus intensely, heads bent together in consultation. Diana felt a pang of exclusion watching their silent debate over dinner choices, then immediately chastised herself for the selfish reaction. This connection was exactly what Sophie needed. After they ordered, Mike nodded toward the lake, where the setting sun painted the water in shades of amber and gold. "Amy's been talking about this all day. First time she's had a deaf friend visit from out of town. Usually it's just us and her grandmother, occasional visits with the deaf community in Kalispell. It's small, nothing like what you'd find in Chicago." Diana watched Sophie animatedly describing something to Amy, her daughter's typical reserve completely absent. I've never seen Sophie this comfortable with another child. Her school has a deaf program, but Mike nodded, understanding, filling the space between them. But programs aren't the same as friends. Kids know the difference between someone who's learning to sign for class credit and someone who lives in the same world they do. The observation cut to the heart of what Diana had missed all these years. She'd focused on educational quality, technological accommodation, professional credentials, all the external markers of an appropriate environment. But she'd overlooked the most basic need, genuine connection with peers who shared Sophie's experience. The girls' meals arrived, served by a waiter who signed the basics, enjoy careful, hot, need anything else with practiced ease. Sophie's surprise and delight at being addressed directly was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Such a simple courtesy, yet clearly a novelty for her. The evening unfolded with surprising ease. Mike was an attentive father, but a relaxed one, letting Amy navigate the social interaction with minimal interference. The contrast with Diana's own hovering style made her uncomfortably aware of how often she intercepted communications meant for Sophie, how frequently she spoke over, or for her daughter, rather than allowing her to represent herself. As they finished their meals, Amy signed something to her father, bouncing slightly in her seat with excitement. Mike turned to Diana. Amy's asking if Sophie can come to our place tomorrow. There's a creek behind the cabin where we sometimes see otters. She wants to show Sophie. Diana hesitated, protective instincts flaring. They barely knew this man and his daughter. Yet Sophie was watching her with such naked hope that denial felt impossible. I'd love to see your home, Diana found herself saying, surprised by her own spontaneity. If you're sure it's not an imposition. Mike's relief was visible, as if he'd expected rejection. Not at all. We don't get many visitors out our way. Amy's been begging to host a real play date for months. The bill arrived and Diana reached for it instinctively. Mike was faster, sliding it toward himself with quiet determination. My invitation, my town. Company card isn't necessary here. The gentle rebuke startled her. Had she become so accustomed to corporate accounting that she'd forgotten the basic etiquette of friendship? The realization made her flush with embarrassment. Outside, the mountain air had cooled considerably with sunset. Sophie shivered slightly, and Diana wrapped her in the light jacket she'd packed as an afterthought. Montana's summer evenings were chillier than she'd anticipated. Mike jotted down directions to his cabin on a napkin, his handwriting unexpectedly elegant for a man with calloused hands. It's about 20 minutes outside town. Nothing fancy, but we've got decent coffee and a view worth the drive. 9 tomorrow. Diana tucked the napkin into her purse, suddenly aware of how long it had been since she'd navigated somewhere without GPS and a digital calendar invitation. The analog nature of the exchange felt like stepping back in time. As they parted ways in the restaurant parking lot, the girls signed their goodbyes with dramatic flair, as if they'd be separated for months rather than hours. Diana caught Amy signing something about her grandmother and a dog, Sophie responding with excited questions. Mike translated, amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. Amy's grandmother rescued a retired service dog last year, Jasper. He's trained to alert for a deaf person, but he's getting old now. Mostly he just sleeps by the fireplace and begs for treats, but the girls are convinced he's some kind of canine superhero. Sophie tugged at Diana's sleeve, signing rapidly. Can we get a dog like Jasper? Please, please, please. The request caught Diana off guard. They'd discussed pets before, but Diana had always cited their busy schedules and high-rise living as practical barriers. Looking at Sophie's pleading expression, those excuses suddenly seemed flimsy. We'll talk about it, sweetheart. She signed the non-committal parent phrase she'd sworn she'd never use. The drive back to their lodge was peaceful. Sophie drowsy but content in the back seat. Diana found herself replaying the evening, analyzing each interaction with the same thoroughness she applied to business negotiations. Mike Anderson defied easy categorization, a former corporate professional turned craftsman, a single father who seemed more at ease in his role than Diana had ever felt in hers, a man who moved between the deaf and hearing worlds with enviable fluency. His life appeared simpler than hers on the surface, yet there was a depth to his choices that challenged her assumptions about success and fulfillment. Diana had always measured achievement in quantifiable metrics: revenue growth, market share, shareholder value. Mike seemed to operate by entirely different standards. At the lodge, Diana carried a half-asleep Sophie to bed, helping her through an abbreviated version of their bedtime routine. As she tucked the covers around her daughter's small form, Sophie signed one last question, her movements slow with approaching sleep. Is Amy my best friend now? The innocent query caught at Diana's heart. How isolated had Sophie been that a single interaction would prompt such a declaration? Would you like her to be? Diana signed back carefully. Sophie nodded, her eyes already drifting closed. She understands me, and her dad understands you. We should stay here forever. The simple childhood logic contained a wisdom that kept Diana awake long after Sophie had fallen asleep. She sat on the cabin's deck, wrapped in a borrowed blanket against the mountain shore, staring at the stars that were never visible through Chicago's light pollution. Her phone lay dark and silent beside her. She'd powered it back on briefly after returning to the lodge, sending a quick message to her assistant confirming their safe arrival, but nothing more. The constant digital tether to her other life felt invasive here, a reminder of obligations she was temporarily evading. A text notification broke the silence. Diana glanced down, expecting her assistant's acknowledgement. Instead, she found a message from Mike. Sorry to text so late. Amy insisted I let you know Jasper is excited to meet Sophie tomorrow. Just a heads up, my mother-in-law will be there too. She's hearing but signs fluently. She's also extremely opinionated about everything, especially parenting. Consider yourself warned. Diana smiled at the unexpected message, tapping out a quick reply. Thanks for the warning. Looking forward to it, opinionated grandmother and all. She hesitated, then added, and thank you for tonight. I can't remember the last time I saw Sophie so animated with another child. The response came almost immediately. Thank you for trusting us enough to say yes. It means more than you know. Diana set the phone down, a strange warmth settling in her chest that had nothing to do with the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Trust wasn't something she extended easily in business or in personal relationships. Yet somehow in the space of a day, she'd found herself trusting this man and his daughter with something far more precious than corporate secrets. Morning arrived with a golden light streaming through the cabin windows, and the scent of pine carried on the mountain breeze. Diana woke before Sophie, a rare occurrence that afforded her the luxury of making coffee and watching the forest come alive outside their deck. A notification on her silent phone caught her attention, an email from James marked urgent. Her finger hovered over the icon, duty warring with determination. After a moment's hesitation, she opened it. The message was unexpectedly civil, almost conciliatory. Diana, I've been thinking about my reaction to your trip. While I still have concerns about the lack of structure and familiar routine for Sophie, I realized my response was disproportionate. Dr. Levinson suggested that my own anxiety about change may be influencing my parenting decisions. I'm not withdrawing my concerns about communication barriers, but I'm willing to postpone any legal actions pending a conversation when you return. Perhaps we can find a middle ground that prioritizes Sophie's needs without resorting to custody modifications. Call when you get back. James. P.S. The hospital board is still pushing for that contract. I've told them to back off using personal leverage. Diana read the email twice, surprise giving way to cautious relief. James wasn't known for self-reflection or compromise. This shift in tone suggested either genuine growth or strategic retreat, possibly both. Either way, it removed the immediate threat hanging over her week with Sophie. The mention of Dr. Levinson was interesting. James had been seeing the family therapist alone since their separation, initially at Diana's suggestion. She hadn't expected it to continue this long or to yield actual insights. Sophie emerged from her bedroom, hair tousled from sleep, eyes bright with anticipation for the day ahead. She signed good morning, then immediately asked if it was time to see Amy and the dog yet. Diana laughed at her eagerness, directing her toward breakfast first. As they ate, Diana found herself studying her daughter with new awareness, noting the confident precision of Sophie's signs when discussing topics that excited her, the subtle shifts in expression that conveyed emphasis and emotion. How had she missed so many nuances in her own child's communication? They arrived at Mike's cabin promptly at 9, following the handwritten directions along increasingly narrow mountain roads until they reached a clearing surrounded by pines. The cabin itself was modest but charming, a traditional log structure with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. Flowers spilled from hanging baskets, and a workshop stood separate from the main house, its doors open to reveal a collection of woodworking tools. Amy burst from the front door before they'd fully parked a large golden retriever, ambling behind her at a more dignified pace. Sophie was out of her seatbelt in record time, barely waiting for Diana to stop the car, before tumbling out to greet her new friend. The girls embraced as if they'd been separated for years instead of hours, then immediately began signing about the tag, who was accepting Sophie's enthusiastic petting with the patient dignity of an elder statesman. Mike emerged from the workshop, wiping his hands on a cloth. He wore a simple t-shirt and work pants, dusted with sawdust, clearly having been at work for some time despite the early hour. "You found us. These back roads can be tricky if you're used to city navigation." Diana stepped out of the car, immediately struck by the scent of fresh-cut wood and wildflowers. The mountain air felt cleaner here than even at their lodge, crisp and invigorating. "Your directions were perfect. This place is beautiful." The compliment was genuine. The setting was postcard-perfect: mountains rising behind the cabin, a meadow dotted with wildflowers stretching to one side, dense forest on the other. A narrow path disappeared into the trees, presumably leading to the creek Amy had mentioned. Mike smiled, a hint of pride warming his expression. "Built most of it myself after leaving the corporate world. Started as a weekend cabin when Amy was tiny. Became home after Sarah left." An older woman appeared in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in a practical braid, her posture straight despite her years. She signed something to Amy, who immediately straightened up and signed back formally. Sophie watched the exchange with wide eyes, then mimicked Amy's signs with careful precision. "Introductions," Mike explained. "My mother-in-law, Catherine. She's big on manners." Catherine approached, extending her hand to Diana with old-fashioned courtesy. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her assessment frank and unapologetic. "So you're Sophie's mother. Amy's been talking about nothing else since yesterday. Coffee's ready inside unless Mike's keeping you out here to avoid my interrogation." Mike rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "Kath, we talked about this. No third degree for our guests." Catherine waved away his concern, already turning back toward the house. "It's not an interrogation to take an interest in your daughter's new friends. Besides, Amy says Sophie's mother is important and busy. I want to know what kind of important things keep her busy." The directness was startling after years navigating corporate diplomacy, where true intentions were layered beneath polite fictions. Diana found herself following Catherine inside with a mixture of trepidation and refreshing relief. The cabin's interior was warm and lived in, with none of the curated perfection of a magazine spread. Books filled mismatched shelves, a quilt draped the back of a well-worn couch, and children's artwork covered the refrigerator. The kitchen opened to a living area anchored by a stone fireplace, where the famous Jasper had already reclaimed his spot on a faded rug. The girls disappeared upstairs to Amy's room after securing permission and promises of creek exploration later. Diana accepted a mug of coffee from Catherine, bracing herself for the promised interrogation. It came without preamble as soon as Mike stepped outside to take a call. "Amy says you don't sign much with your daughter. Is that true?" The bluntness of the question took Diana aback, defensive words rising automatically to her lips. She swallowed them back, challenging herself to answer honestly. "I sign, but not well enough. Not fluently. I've been prioritizing other things." Catherine nodded, her expression softening slightly. "At least you're honest about it. Mike told me you're some kind of CEO. Important work, I imagine." The absence of judgment in her tone was unexpected. Diana found herself relaxing minutely. "I run a healthcare technology company. We develop software that helps doctors and patients communicate more effectively." The irony of her professional focus wasn't lost on either of them. Catherine's mouth twitched. "So you help strangers talk to each other better than you can talk to your own child. Interesting career choice." The assessment stung with its accuracy. Diana had never consciously connected her professional passion for improving medical communication with her personal failure to bridge the gap with Sophie. The parallel was too obvious now to ignore. "I never thought of it that way." Diana admitted, surprising herself with her candor. "But you're right. I've spent years solving communication problems for everyone except the person who matters most." Catherine studied her over the rim of her coffee mug, assessment, giving way to something that might have been approval. "Recognizing the problem is the first step to fixing it. Most people never get that far. They're too busy defending their choices to examine them." Outside, they could see Mike showing Sophie his workshop, the little girl's attention fixed on something he was demonstrating with his hands. "He was like you when Amy was first diagnosed." Catherine continued, her gaze following Diana's. "Working all hours, climbing the corporate ladder. Then Sarah left, and he had to choose career or daughter. Most men would have chosen the career and hired help, sent checks, but kept their distance." She set down her mug with a decisive click. Mike chose differently, walked away from a six-figure salary to become a small-town carpenter. Everyone thought he was having a breakdown. Turned out he was just finding his way home. The story told so matter-of-factly resonated with uncomfortable force. Diana had never considered walking away from medicine, from the empire she'd built. The idea seemed impossible, unthinkable, And yet, watching Mike with Sophie through the window, she felt the first tremor of doubt about her own immovable priorities. "I can't just abandon my company," she said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. "Hundreds of people depend on me." Catherine's laugh held no cruelty, only the wisdom of years. "No one's suggesting you become a mountain hermit, my dear. But there are more options than all or nothing. The question isn't whether you can walk away from your company. It's whether you can walk toward your daughter before she stops waiting for you." The conversation shifted as Mike and Sophie returned the little girl excitedly signing about the birdhouse Mike had shown her. Diana watched their interaction with new eyes, noting how naturally Mike positioned himself at Sophie's eye level, how his attention remained undivided despite the obvious projects waiting in his workshop. These were small things easy to dismiss as the luxuries of a simpler life. But Diana knew better. Attention was a choice, not a circumstance. Mike had rebuilt his entire existence around that choice, while she had been arranging her daughter around the edges of her career. The realization left her unbalanced, questioning assumptions so fundamental to her identity that she'd never thought to examine them. Before she could dwell further, the girls reappeared, Amy signing rapidly about the creek, and Sophie responding with equal enthusiasm. The promised expedition was clearly due. Mike gathered supplies with practiced efficiency: water bottles, sunscreen, a small first aid kit, snacks. The preparation was automatic, the rhythm of a parent accustomed to outdoor adventures. Diana found herself following his lead, uncertain in this unfamiliar territory where she couldn't rely on assistance or careful scheduling. The path to the creek wound through pine forest, dappled sunlight playing across the needle-strewn ground. Sophie held Diana's hand, tugging her forward whenever she slowed to navigate an uneven patch. The physical contact was a rare gift at home. Sophie had grown increasingly independent, pulling away from maternal touches. Here she sought connection, pointing out fascinating pine cones and interesting rocks, her hands flying between signing and touching everything in reach. The creek revealed itself suddenly, a clear, shallow stream, tumbling over smooth stones, gurgling through the forest with cheerful determination. Amy immediately kicked off her shoes, beckoning Sophie to join her at the water's edge. After a questioning glance at Diana, Sophie followed suit, squealing silently as her feet touched the cold water. Diana perched on a fallen log, watching the girls splash and sign their communication, flowing as naturally as the creek itself. Mike settled beside her, close but not crowding, his presence solid and undemanding. "Creek's running high this year," he observed. "Good snowpack last winter. The otters have been more active than usual, built a den just around that bend." Diana nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The scene before her was so perfect, so idyllic, that it felt like a mirage, a glimpse into a life she hadn't known to want, much less how to create. Mike seemed content with silence, watching the girls with the relaxed vigilance, particular to parents alert to danger but allowing freedom within safe boundaries. Diana found herself studying his profile, the laugh lines around his eyes, the quiet competence in his posture. He belonged here in these mountains, in this simple, profound connection with his daughter, in a way Diana had never belonged anywhere. How did you know? The question escaped before she could reconsider it. How did you know walking away from your career was the right choice? Mike didn't pretend to misunderstand. He picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in his hands as he considered her question. "I didn't, not really. It was more desperation than certainty. Sarah left on a Tuesday. By Friday, I'd missed 2 critical meetings because Amy's daycare called. She was having meltdowns, refusing to eat, signing the same question over and over. Mama come back when? The nanny I hired quit by Sunday. My boss was sending increasingly angry emails. And there I was trying to review quarterly projections while my 2-year-old daughter signed Daddy See Me over and over, getting smaller and quieter each time I looked at my phone instead of her hands." He skipped the stone across the creek's surface, watching it bounce 5 times before sinking. "Something broke in me that night. Not dramatically. I didn't throw my laptop out the window or anything. I just saw clearly, maybe for the first time. I had exactly one chance to be Amy's father. One childhood to get right. The job would always be there in some form. But Amy wouldn't. The simple truth of it struck Diana like physical force. One childhood. One chance. How much of Sophie's had she already missed, buried in board meetings and quarterly reports? "I built this company from nothing." She said, the words heavy between them. "Started in my garage with one programmer and a vision. Now we have offices in 3 countries, over 200 employees. It's not just a job. It's mine. My creation." Mike nodded, understanding in his eyes. I get that. I do. Walking away from something you've built feels like abandoning your own child. The irony is that sometimes we have to choose between our metaphorical children and our actual ones. He picked up another stone smoother than the first. But it doesn't have to be all or nothing. After the initial shock wore off, I realized I could still design buildings, still solve structural problems, just differently on my terms. Smaller scale, more personal control. Less money, more meaning. He looked at her directly, his gaze steady. The question isn't whether you keep your company or leave it. It's whether you can reshape it to fit the life you actually want instead of reshaping your life to fit the company. Before Diana could respond, a commotion from the girls interrupted their conversation. Amy was signing frantically, pointing downstream. Sophie was bouncing with excitement, tugging at Diana's sleeve. Mike grinned, signing back to Amy. Otters, he translated. 3 of them just around the bend. If we're quiet, we might get a better look. The moment of profound life questioning evaporated as they crept downstream, the girls barely containing their excitement. Diana found herself holding her breath as they rounded the curve in the creek, Mike gesturing for everyone to move slowly. There they were, 3 sleek brown bodies sliding through the water, with liquid grace tumbling over each other in what looked remarkably like play. Sophie's eyes were wide with wonder, her hand gripping Diana's with unprecedented force. Diana knelt beside her daughter, sharing the moment of discovery, both of them perfectly still in mutual appreciation. Something shifted between them in that silent observation, a connection that transcended language, that needed no translation or interpretation. For perhaps the first time, Diana wasn't an outsider to Sophie's experience. They were simply 2 humans witnessing the same marvel, feeling the same joy. The otters eventually noticed their audience and disappeared with efficient splashes. The spell broken, Sophie turned to Diana, her hands exploding with excited signs too rapid for comprehension. But her face, her beautiful, expressive face, told Diana everything she needed to know about her daughter's delight. For once, Diana didn't reach for her phone to look up unfamiliar signs. She simply signed back the one thing she knew with absolute certainty: I love you. This is magic. Sophie's answering smile contained universes. The magic of the otters lingered as they hiked back through the forest. Sophie and Amy led the way, heads bent together in animated conversation, their hands flying in the private language of newfound friendship. Diana watched her daughter navigate tree roots and uneven ground with surprising confidence, a physical ease she rarely displayed in Chicago's carefully controlled environments. Mike fell into step beside Diana, his presence steady and unobtrusive. The comfortable silence between them felt novel to Diana, who was accustomed to filling every pause with productive conversation. In boardrooms, silence signaled weakness. Here, among towering pines and dappled sunlight, it felt like strength. Back at the cabin, Catherine had prepared lunch, simple sandwiches, and homemade lemonade served on the wide porch. The girls claimed the porch steps, legs dangling as they ate, and signed their attention, drifting between their food and Jasper, who had positioned himself strategically for fallen crumbs. Diana found herself studying Catherine's interactions with Amy, noting how the older woman incorporated signing into every exchange without hesitation or self-consciousness. There was no separation between spoken and sign language in this household, no sense that ASL was an accommodation rather than simply another way of communicating. How long did it take you to become fluent? Diana asked Catherine during a lull in conversation. The older woman considered the question, her eyes sharp with assessment. 2 years of serious study, another year of daily practice before I stopped thinking about the signs and just started thinking in them. It's like any language, immersion matters more than formal instruction. She glanced toward Amy and Sophie, who were now attempting to teach Jasper a sign for treat. But I had an advantage you don't. I wasn't trying to run a company at the same time. Mike reduced his hours, then changed careers entirely. I was retired with nothing but time. The real question isn't how long it took me, but how much time you're willing to invest. The challenge was issued without malice, but Diana felt its weight nonetheless. Before she could formulate a response, Mike's phone rang. He checked the screen, frowned slightly, and excused himself to take the call inside. Catherine watched him go with a knowing look. Job offer, she said simply. 3rd one this month. Denver firm trying to lure him back to the corporate world. More money, more prestige, less time for what matters. Diana glanced toward the house, surprised. Mike had presented his career change as a settled matter, a sacrifice made and accepted. The idea that he might still be fielding offers from his former industry hadn't occurred to her. Does he ever consider accepting the question escape before Diana could censor it? Catherine's smile held a mother's pride mixed with pragmatic understanding. He considers, the money would make things easier. Amy's education won't be cheap, and there's always the worry about health insurance when you're self-employed. But then he looks at what he'd be trading, and the math doesn't work. She nodded toward the girls now teaching each other what appeared to be a clapping game involving elaborate hand movements. Some currencies can't be converted to dollars. The observation resonated uncomfortably. Diana had always equated financial provision with good parenting, secure in the knowledge that Sophie would never want for material advantages. The notion that those advantages might be purchased at a cost neither of them could afford was still settling into her consciousness, an unwelcome revelation she couldn't unsee. Mike emerged from the cabin, slipping his phone back into his pocket with a casual finality that suggested the conversation had ended predictably. His smile gave nothing away as he rejoined them. Sorry about that. Construction client with a deadline crisis. Speaking of which, he turned to the girls, signing something that made Amy nod enthusiastically, and Sophie looked to Diana with pleading eyes. I promised to show Sophie my current project before you leave, Mike explained. It's a library installation for the elementary school in Kalispell, interactive reading nooks designed specifically for deaf and hard-of-hearing students. Amy's been my design consultant. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, as was Sophie's evident excitement at the prospect. Diana found herself nodding agreement before she'd consciously decided. The workshop behind the cabin was smaller than Diana had expected, but impeccably organized. Tools hung in careful arrangements on the walls wood, in various stages of preparation stacked by type and size. The space smelled of sawdust and varnish and earthy perfume, entirely unlike the antiseptic cleanliness of Diana's corporate office. Against one wall stood the project in progress, a curved wooden structure that resembled a miniature amphitheater. Mike guided Sophie to it, showing her how the design created natural sightlines for children facing a storyteller, how vibration elements were incorporated into the seating, how lighting was positioned to eliminate shadows that might obscure signing. It was thoughtfully, beautifully engineered, not merely accessible, but designed from the ground up with deaf children in mind. Diana recognized quality craftsmanship when she saw it even in fields outside her expertise. This wasn't the work of someone who had settled for a lesser career. This was mastery, purpose-driven, and precise. Sophie circled the structure with wide eyes, her hands asking questions faster than Diana could follow. Mike answered each one with patient attention, explaining techniques and choices with the seriousness he might give a professional colleague. Amy tugged at Diana's hand, leading her to a corner where a child-sized desk displayed an array of drawings, blueprints rendered in crayon and colored pencil, clearly Amy's contributions to the design process. The little girl signed, rapidly explaining her role with unmistakable pride. Diana caught enough to understand that Amy had tested early prototypes, suggesting improvements from a user's perspective. Mike had incorporated her feedback into the final design, crediting her as a co-creator, rather than merely a consultant. The collaborative relationship between father and daughter struck Diana forcefully. She tried to imagine inviting Sophie into her work in any meaningful way and came up empty. MetaSync's sleek offices and abstract digital products offered no entry point for a 6-year-old's contribution, no tangible way for Sophie to witness or participate in her mother's daily work. As if reading her thoughts, Catherine appeared at her elbow. He's building more than furniture, the older woman observed quietly. He's building her confidence, her sense that her perspective matters. That's harder to measure than quarterly earnings, but the dividends pay out over lifetimes. The afternoon stretched into early evening, the planned brief visit extending as the girls begged for more time together. Diana found herself reluctant to end the day even as practical considerations, dinner, Sophie's bedtime routine, the drive back to their lodge, pressed at the edges of her awareness. Catherine solved the dilemma by announcing she'd prepared enough stew for everyone, the invitation issued as a statement of fact rather than a question. The simple hospitality extended without pretense or elaborate preparation reminded Diana of childhood visits to her grandmother's farm in Minnesota, before achievements and accolades had complicated the straightforward business of breaking bread together. After dinner, the adults settled on the porch while the girls played an elaborate game in the yard with Jasper, as both participant and audience. The mountain twilight painted everything in soft lavender light, the temperature dropping enough to warrant the coffee Catherine pressed into Diana's hands. That's the second time you've checked your watch in 5 minutes, Catherine observed. Hot date waiting back at the lodge. Diana flushed embarrassed at being caught in the ingrained habit of time management. Sophie's bedtime is 8:30, she explained. We have a routine. Catherine nodded, neither judging nor dismissing the concern. Routines matter. So do exceptions. Some nights are worth staying up late for. Mike leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he watched the girls. Amy's regular bedtime is 8, but we have what we call magic nights, special occasions, when the usual rules bend a little. Meteor showers, first snowfall visits from new friends. The world doesn't end if bedtime slides once in a while. The concept of magic nights struck Diana as both foreign and familiar, foreign to her current parenting style, but reminiscent of rare occasions in her own childhood when her mother had woken her to see northern lights or allowed her to stay up for a lunar eclipse. Those memories remain vivid decades later, treasured exceptions to the usual structure. Diana found herself nodding slowly. I suppose tonight could be a magic night. The relief in Sophie's expression when Diana signed that they could stay longer twisted something in her chest. Had she become so rigid, so schedule-bound, that her daughter expected disappointment as the default? As true darkness fell, Mike built a small fire in the pit on the edge of the yard. The girls roasted marshmallows under Catherine's supervision, while Mike disappeared briefly into the workshop, returning with what looked like a small wooden box. He settled beside Diana on the porch steps, the firelight casting his features into planes of light and shadow. Made this last year when Amy was struggling with a school project about family history. He opened the box, revealing a series of wooden discs, each roughly the size of a drink coaster. Each disc bore an image, some carved directly into the wood, others carefully transferred photographs sealed under clear varnish. It's a tactile timeline, he explained, lifting one disc that showed a baby, presumably, Amy cradled in the arms of a younger Mike and a woman Diana assumed was Sarah. Each disc is a year of her life with important moments she can feel and see. Diana ran her fingers over the carved surface, feeling the ridges that formed the image. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the concept elegantly simple. It's beautiful and thoughtful. Mike shuffled through the discs until he found one showing a much younger Catherine holding toddler Amy in what appeared to be a garden. This was right after Sarah left. Amy was having nightmares, refusing to sleep. Catherine moved in, temporarily planted this vegetable garden with Amy as therapy. They called it their growing place, not just for tomatoes, but for healing. The vulnerability of sharing such personal history struck Diana forcefully. In her world, setbacks were minimized challenges, reframed as opportunities, weakness concealed at all costs. Here was Mike offering his darkest moments, without shame or self-consciousness, presenting them simply as part of the journey that had brought them to this porch, this moment. Diana found herself sharing in return, words emerging unbidden. When Sophie was first diagnosed, I researched constantly. Medical journals, educational theories, technological innovations. James, her father, focused on treatments, on fixing. I kept looking for answers, for the perfect solution that would make everything right. It took me too long to realize that Sophie wasn't a problem to solve. The admission hung in the firelit air between them, the first time Diana had articulated the fundamental misalignment that had fractured her marriage and shaped her approach to motherhood. Mike nodded, recognition in his eyes. I think most parents of deaf kids go through something similar. We're taught to see deafness as something to overcome, not a different way of experiencing the world. It took Amy's preschool teacher, who was deaf herself, to help me understand I was asking all the wrong questions. He turned one of the wooden discs in his hands, his voice thoughtful. She told me to stop focusing on what Amy couldn't hear and start noticing everything she could see. Said that until I learned to watch the world through her eyes, I'd always be a tourist in her country, never a true citizen. The metaphor crystallized something Diana had been circling for days. She'd approached ASL as a useful tool, Sophie's deafness as a condition to manage. She'd remained a tourist phrasebook in hand, never committing to full cultural immersion. Catherine reappeared with the girls, who were sticky with marshmallow residue and glowing with the particular satisfaction of children who've successfully extended their bedtime. Sophie immediately climbed into Diana's lap, a physical affection she'd been increasingly withholding in recent months. The simple trust of it, her daughter's warm weight, the strawberry scent of her hair, created a lump in Diana's throat. The moment was interrupted by the harsh buzz of Diana's phone. James's name illuminated the screen, the third missed call from him that day. Diana hesitated, torn between immediate responsibility and present connection. Mike noticed her dilemma, nodding toward the cabin. Take it if you need to. We'll keep an eye on the marshmallow monster. The permission, offered without judgment, allowed Diana to step away, moving toward the edge of the yard where the conversation wouldn't disturb the fireside gathering. James answered on the first ring, his voice taut with controlled frustration. I've been trying to reach you all day. Is Sophie okay? The genuine concern beneath his irritation reminded Diana that whatever their differences, James loved their daughter deeply. She's fine. Better than fine, actually. We've made friends here, another family with the deaf daughter Sophie's age. We lost track of time. The admission of unscheduled spontaneity clearly surprised James, whose silence stretched several beats too long. You made friends with strangers. That doesn't sound like you, Diana. The observation carried no malice, just genuine confusion. Diana realized with a start that James was right. Spontaneous social connections weren't part of her carefully constructed life. Every relationship served a purpose: professional advancement, strategic alliance, necessary service. Even her closest friends were largely drawn from professional circles, connections maintained through scheduled lunches and reciprocal favors. I'm trying something new, she said simply. James's skepticism was audible even across hundreds of miles. This sounds like another grand gesture, Diana. Like the time you hired that ASL tutor, or enrolled in that weekend immersion program, or bought that specialized tablet. You always start these things with such intensity then. The corporate executive would have interrupted, defended, counterattacked. The woman standing under Montana stars watching her daughter laugh by firelight simply listened. James wasn't entirely wrong. Her pattern with Sophie's needs had indeed been cycles of hyperfixation followed by distraction when work inevitably reclaimed her attention. You're right, she said finally. I have a pattern of starting strong and fading out. But this is different. I'm different. The silence that followed suggested James hadn't expected agreement. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted. The hospital board backed off about the contract, by the way. Apparently your legal team made some calls, reminded everyone about ethics violations and conflicts of interest. I want to be clear, I never asked them to leverage Sophie in business negotiations. Diana believed him. For all their differences, James had always maintained certain ethical boundaries, particularly around their daughter. I know you didn't. We're both trying to do what's best for Sophie, just with different approaches. This new Diana conciliatory reflective clearly unsettled James, whose response came slower than usual. My therapist says I've been projecting my control issues onto Sophie's education. Says I need to distinguish between my anxiety about uncertainty and actual risk to Sophie's development. The admission was startling in its vulnerability. James had always presented as supremely confident in his medical perspective, dismissive of approaches that couldn't be quantified or measured. That sounds like hard work, Diana said carefully, but important. James exhaled audibly. It is harder than neurosurgery, if I'm honest. Look, I'm not withdrawing my concerns about communication barriers, but I'm willing to pause the legal maneuvers, give us both space to figure out a better approach. If you're serious about improving your ASL, really committed this time, the qualification hung unspoken between them, years of broken promises and abandoned efforts justifying his skepticism. I am, Diana affirmed, not just learning signs, but understanding what it means to be part of deaf culture. Sophie deserves a mother who can truly enter her world, not just visit occasionally. The words once spoken solidified something that had been forming inside her since the airport encounter with Mike. This wasn't about checking a parental box or fulfilling an obligation. It was about citizenship in her daughter's country, about earning the right to fully know her child. When she returned to the fireside, Sophie was drooping with exhaustion, her excitement finally yielding to the day's accumulated fatigue. Diana signed that it was time to go, bracing for resistance. To her surprise, Sophie nodded sleepily, offering no protest beyond a request that they return tomorrow. The parting was filled with promises of another visit, exchanges of phone numbers, plans already forming for the remaining days of their Montana stay. As they prepared to leave, Mike walked them to their car, Amy trailing behind with Sophie, the girls reluctant to separate despite their evident tiredness. Catherine pressed a jar of homemade preserves into Diana's hands, the simple hospitality more touching than any elaborate gift. Huckleberry gathered right here on the mountain, good on everything from toast to ice cream, a taste of Montana when you're back in Chicago. Diana thanked her with genuine warmth, already anticipating breakfast with Sophie, this small connection to the day they'd shared. As she buckled Sophie into her seat, Diana noticed Mike having what appeared to be a serious conversation with Amy. The little girl nodded, then approached their car with formal politeness, signing carefully to Sophie before handing her a small object. Diana recognized it as one of the wooden timeline discs from earlier this one, showing what appeared to be a simplified carving of two girls by a creek. Sophie's expression bloomed with delight as she traced the carved figures with her fingers, signing thank you with emphatic enthusiasm. Mike leaned down to Sophie's window. Amy wanted you to have this as a remember friend gift. I carved it tonight while you were having s'mores. It's you two at the creek with the otters. The spontaneous gesture the gift created in stolen moments, while the children played, embodied everything Diana was coming to understand about Mike's approach to parenting. Small moments captured and honored, memories made tangible. As they drove away, Sophie clutched the wooden disc, her eyes heavy with approaching sleep, but her smile still luminous in the car's dim interior. Diana glanced in the rearview mirror, catching the silhouettes of Mike and Amy waving from the edge of their yard framed by Montana twilight and the dying glow of the fire. The drive back to the lodge passed in comfortable silence, Sophie drifting to sleep with her head against the window, the wooden disc still held in her small hand. Diana carried her sleeping daughter into their cabin, managing the bedtime routine with minimal disruption before settling Sophie into bed. Alone on the deck, wrapped in the now familiar borrowed blanket, Diana found herself replaying the day, the otters by the creek, Catherine's unflinching questions, Mike's wooden timeline, the girls' instant connection. Each memory felt like a stepping stone across a river she hadn't known needed crossing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Amy's already planning tomorrow's adventure. Hope that's not presumptuous. She's thinking fishing at the lake. Sophie seemed excited about the idea. Diana smiled at the careful phrasing, the respectful acknowledgement that their time belonged to them. Not presumptuous at all. Sophie would be thrilled. Fair warning, neither of us has ever been fishing. His response came quickly. Perfect. Amy loves playing expert. Warning accepted. Prepare for extensive fish-related signing. The simple exchange felt unfamiliar in its ease, lacking the careful positioning and strategic considerations that characterize Diana's usual communications. There was no agenda here, no advantage to be gained or lost, just two parents coordinating their children's joy. A second text followed. Realized today I never asked what you do exactly. CEO of a healthcare tech company covers a lot of territory. What does MetaSync make? The question was natural enough, but Diana found herself hesitating before answering. Her reflexive response would have been the polished elevator pitch she'd delivered countless times. Market position, growth metrics, innovation, differentiators. Instead, she found herself typing, "We build software that helps doctors understand patients better, and patients understand their care." Started with translation services for hospitals, expanded to patient education platforms. The irony that I've spent a decade improving medical communication while struggling to communicate with my own daughter isn't lost on me. The admission felt both vulnerable and freeing. Mike's response arrived moments later. No irony. Perfect sense. We often give others what we most need ourselves. Amy's mother was a speech therapist before she left, specialized in language acquisition disorders. The revelation landed with quiet impact. They were both in their ways attempting to solve externally what remained unresolved internally. Diana building bridges of understanding in healthcare, while a chasm existed at home. Sarah helping others communicate while failing to connect with her own family. Their conversation continued intermittently as Diana prepared for bed, fragments of lives shared without the usual filters of professional propriety or social positioning. Mike described his current projects, his hopes for Amy's education, his ongoing negotiations with health insurance as a self-employed parent of a child with specialized needs. Diana found herself sharing the challenges of building MetaSync, the board pressures, the constant balancing act of leadership and motherhood. In the darkness of the Montana night, digital words crossing the short distance between lodge and cabin, they constructed something Diana hadn't experienced in years, a friendship built on genuine recognition rather than mutual advantage. Morning arrived with another perfect Montana day, sunlight streaming through pine branches. The scent of forest carried on the cool mountain air. Sophie woke early, vibrating with excitement about the planned fishing expedition. Her enthusiasm was infectious, drawing Diana fully into the present moment, rather than allowing her thoughts to drift toward work concerns or future plans. They met Mike and Amy at the lake, a picturesque spot where mountains reflected perfectly in still waters. Mike had brought extra fishing gear, setting up impromptu lessons on the dock, while Catherine watched from a comfortable chair, offering occasional commentary and keeping score of caught and released fish with exaggerated formality that delighted the girls. Diana surprised herself by embracing the experience, fully baiting hooks, despite initial squeamishness, celebrating Sophie's first catch with genuine excitement rather than performative enthusiasm, allowing herself to be drawn into the moment without mental reservation or divided attention. The morning unfolded with the unhurried rhythm that seemed to characterize Mike's approach to life, present, purposeful, unrushed. Diana found herself absorbing not just ASL vocabulary related to fishing, but the underlying philosophy embodied in Mike's interactions with Amy: full attention, shared discovery, mutual respect. During a lull while the girls explored the shoreline under Catherine's watchful eye, Mike and Diana sat side by side on the dock, feet dangling above the clear water. The conversation turned unexpectedly serious when Mike mentioned an upcoming trip to Boston. Evaluating schools for Amy, he explained. She's thriving academically, but the resources here are limited. The local deaf program is well-intentioned but understaffed, underfunded. There's a specialized school in Massachusetts with an excellent reputation, but it means decisions I'm not ready to make. Diana recognized the conflict in his expression, the same one she faced regularly in balancing Sophie's needs against practical considerations. Relocating or boarding school. Neither option seems ideal for either of you. Mike nodded, his gaze on Amy as she carefully examined a found feather, signing rapidly to Sophie about its possible origin. Exactly. Uprooting her from the only home she's known, away from her grandmother, from everything familiar, that feels wrong. Sending her away feels worse. But keeping her here might be selfish if it limits her education, her future opportunities. The dilemma was achingly familiar. Diana had faced similar decisions about Sophie's schooling, ultimately choosing the expensive private program in Chicago over potentially more specialized options that would have required impossible logistics. Have you talked to Amy about it? Diana asked carefully. About what she wants. Mike's laugh held no humor. That's the impossible part. She's 7. She wants to be with friends, with family, with Jasper. She can't possibly understand what she might be missing educationally, what doors might close if she doesn't have certain opportunities now. That's the burden of parenting, isn't it? Making decisions with consequences. Our children can't comprehend, hoping we're choosing wisdom over comfort. The philosophical turn surprised Diana, though it shouldn't have. She was coming to recognize that beneath Mike's practical exterior lay a deeply thoughtful mind, one that approached parenting with the same caring consideration he brought to his craftsmanship. Before she could respond, a commotion from the shoreline drew their attention. Sophie was signing frantically, genuine distress evident in her expression. Diana was on her feet, immediately moving toward her daughter with Mike close behind. Amy was pointing at something in the shallow water, a small bird, clearly injured, flapping one wing, while the other hung at an unnatural angle. Catherine was already approaching with a small towel, her movements careful and measured. Sophie turned to Diana, signing with urgent concern, "We have to help, it's hurt." The situation demanded immediate response, but Diana found herself momentarily frozen, uncertain how to proceed. Mike stepped forward, smoothly kneeling to address both girls at eye level, signing as he spoke. "You're right, we should help, but we need to be very careful. Wild animals are scared of people even when we want to help them." He laid out a simple plan. Catherine would gently wrap the bird in the towel, while the girls prepared a temporary box with soft material for a nest. They would take the bird to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center Mike knew was operating just outside Whitefish. The crisis was handled with calm efficiency. Each person assigned a role, the girls' concern channeled into purposeful action rather than helpless distress. Within 30 minutes, they were in Mike's truck, the injured bird secured in its makeshift transport box, heading toward the Wildlife Center. Diana found herself in the unfamiliar position of passenger rather than driver, both literally and figuratively. Mike navigated the situation with the confidence of someone accustomed to unexpected complications, adapting plans without frustration or rigidity. The Wildlife Center turned out to be a converted ranch house set on several acres of fenced property. A weathered sign announced it as Second Chances Wildlife Rehabilitation, the name painted beside a stylized image of a soaring bird. Inside, they were greeted by a young woman who introduced herself as Elena, a staff rehabilitator. She examined the bird, a juvenile kingfisher, she explained with gentle expertise, before taking it to a back room for more thorough assessment. The girls watched the process with solemn attention, their earlier distress transforming into focused curiosity under Elena's kind guidance. While they waited for news, Elena invited the girls to help prepare food for some of the center's less critical patients. Diana watched as Sophie, normally hesitant in unfamiliar environments, followed instructions with careful precision, her focus absolute as she measured portions of specialized feed under Amy's experienced guidance. Mike stood beside Diana, observation in his voice. They're good for each other. Amy's showing off a little, being the expert. Sophie's pushing past her comfort zone to keep up, both growing in the process. The insight resonated. Diana had enrolled Sophie in numerous activities over the years: gymnastics, art classes, swim lessons, always with the best intentions for her development. But she'd never witnessed this particular kind of peer-motivated growth, the natural stretching that occurred when children connected authentically. Elena returned with cautiously optimistic news. The Kingfisher had a wing fracture that seemed treatable. The center would care for it until ready for release, likely several weeks. Would the girls like to help name it for the center's records? The question sparked intense signing between Sophie and Amy, a rapid-fire debate that Diana couldn't fully follow. Mike's expression shifted from amusement to something more complex as the conversation continued. He leaned closer to Diana, translating quietly. They're arguing about the perfect name. Amy suggested Lucky, but Sophie thinks that's too obvious for a bird that got hurt. She's proposing Journey because it has a broken wing but will fly again someday. Amy's impressed with the symbolism, but thinks the sign for Journey is too complicated for daily use. They've now moved on to debating whether practical considerations should outweigh poetic ones in naming conventions. The sophistication of the debate, the abstract thinking, the consideration of practical versus symbolic value struck Diana forcefully. She'd been underestimating Sophie's cognitive complexity, assuming limitations that existed in their communication, not in her daughter's mind. The girls eventually compromised on Scout, a name that satisfied both Amy's practical requirements and Sophie's desire for meaningful connection to the bird story. Elena recorded it, officially treating the decision with the seriousness it deserved in the children's eyes. As they prepared to leave, Elena offered the girls junior rehabilitation certificates and information about the center's education programs. Diana noticed Sophie studying the pamphlet with unusual intensity before carefully folding it into her pocket. On the drive back, Sophie signed a question that Mike translated with raised eyebrows. She's asking if you could bring her back to volunteer at the center when she's older, maybe next summer. They have a program for kids starting at age 8. The question contained multitudes' assumption of future visits to Montana, long-term planning expression of a developing interest. All markers of Sophie engaging with the world in ways Diana hadn't witnessed before, or perhaps hadn't been present enough to notice. I think that sounds wonderful, Diana signed carefully. We can definitely explore that possibility. The conditional phrasing was automatic, the CEO's habit of avoiding absolute commitments. Sophie's face fell slightly, the disappointment evident despite her attempt to hide it. Diana recognized the moment as a crossroads: continue her pattern of qualified promises or commit fully to this new understanding between them. She tried again, signing with deliberate clarity. Yes, we will come back, I promise. The transformation in Sophie's expression, from cautious hope to radiant certainty, crystallized everything Diana had been learning since their arrival in Montana. Her daughter needed more than material provision and educational opportunity. She needed promises kept, commitments honored, a mother who said yes without hedging and meant it without reservation. The remainder of the day passed in gentle activity: lunch at a local cafe where the staff greeted Amy by name and made efforts to communicate directly with Sophie, a visit to Mike's current installation site, where the girls contributed to the project by testing the reading nooks for comfort and sightlines, ice cream on the town's main street, as the afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light. Throughout, Diana observed Mike's parenting with increasing appreciation. He set clear boundaries without rigidity, encouraged independence within safe parameters, respected Amy's opinions without abdicating adult responsibility. Most striking was his complete presence, phone tucked away, attention undivided, fully inhabiting each moment with his daughter rather than merely supervising her activities. As evening approached, Mike suggested dinner at their cabin. Catherine had been preparing a special meal, apparently a tradition for their last night before Amy's grandmother returned to her own home. The invitation was extended with the easy confidence of someone who expected acceptance, the assumption of friendship rather than the tentative offering of an acquaintance. Diana found herself accepting without hesitation the decision, requiring no mental calculation of pros and cons, no assessment of strategic value. The simplicity of it, saying yes because she and Sophie wanted to, because their company was desired, because connection held inherent worth, felt revolutionary in its ordinariness. Back at Mike's cabin, they found Catherine orchestrating what appeared to be a multi-course production. The kitchen counters were covered with ingredients, the cabin filled with appetizing aromas that drew appreciative signs from both girls. Mike laughed at Diana's evident surprise. "Don't let the practical exterior fool you. My mother-in-law was a caterer before retirement. She only breaks out the full culinary arsenal for special occasions." Special occasions, Diana thought. Their visit qualified as a special occasion in this household. The realization warmed her more than it should have. Catherine put them all to work. Mike on grill duty, the girls setting the table, Diana assigned to salad preparation under Catherine's exacting direction. The collaboration felt foreign at first, and Diana's home meals appeared through the efforts of hired help or delivery services, but gradually assumed a comfortable rhythm, the shared effort creating a sense of investment in the coming meal. As they worked, Diana found herself drawn into conversation with Catherine, the older woman's direct questions bypassing Diana's usual social filters. "So what happens when you go back to Chicago? All this personal growth and revelation does, it survived the return to corner offices and board meetings?" The bluntness might have offended Diana a week ago. Now it felt like necessary accountability, a question she'd been asking herself with increasing frequency. "I've been thinking about that," she admitted, carefully slicing cucumbers to Catherine's specifications. "I can't continue exactly as before, that's clear, but I'm not ready to abandon everything I've built either." Catherine nodded, assessing Diana's knife skills with critical professionalism. False dichotomies are the enemy of good parenting. It's never really all or nothing, career or family. The question is priorities, boundaries, what you're willing to sacrifice and what you're not. The wisdom resonated with Diana's evolving thoughts, giving shape to half-formed resolutions that had been developing since their arrival in Montana. "I built medicine to improve healthcare communication," she said slowly, testing the idea as she spoke it. "But the company's structure has evolved to prioritize growth over mission, shareholder value over impact. Maybe it's time to realign the business with its original purpose and realign my role to accommodate what matters most." Catherine's approving nod felt like benediction from an unexpected source, a validation of possibility from someone who understood both the importance of work and the irreplaceable value of presence in a child's life. Dinner was served on the porch as sunset painted the mountains in spectacular hues of pink and gold. The meal unfolded with easy conversation, stories shared, future plans discussed. The girls contributed fully, their signing interpreted seamlessly by Mike included as equal participants rather than children to be managed around adult interaction. As darkness fell and stars emerged in the clear Montana sky, Diana felt a strange sense of completion, not ending but fulfillment, as if some essential circuit had closed within her, connecting disparate parts of herself that had long operated in isolation. The farewells held none of the awkwardness Diana might have expected. Plans were made for one final meeting before their departure breakfast at the Lodge restaurant, a chance for Sophie to say proper goodbyes to her new friends. Phone numbers were confirmed, promises exchanged, the foundations of continued connection laid with surprising solidity for a friendship merely days old. As they prepared to leave, Mike pulled something from his workshop and presented it to Sophie. A small wooden box similar to Amy's timeline collection, but containing just 3 discs, the Otter Creek, the Wildlife Center, and the fishing dock. A tactile memory of their Montana week carved with the same care he brought to all his creations. Sophie's face illuminated with joy as she traced the images, the physical representation of memories they'd built together, clearly touching her deeply. She signed "thank you" with emphatic repetition, then surprised everyone by throwing her arms around Mike in an impulsive hug. Diana felt tears threatening the simple gift, embodying everything she'd been missing in her approach to motherhood: attention to detail, honoring of experience, recognition of what truly mattered to Sophie beyond material provision or educational advantage. The drive back to the lodge passed in thoughtful silence, Sophie clutching her wooden box of memories, Diana mentally crafting the framework of changes to come. By the time they reached their cabin, both were ready for sleep, the day's emotions and activities having exhausted them in the most satisfying way. As Diana tucked Sophie into bed, her daughter signed a question that stopped her heart. "When we go home, will you still see me?" The query laid bare everything: Sophie's awareness of her mother's divided attention, her fear that this new connection would evaporate upon return to normal life, her desire for the present Diana to remain, rather than reverting to the distracted version she knew too well. Diana knelt beside the bed, signing with careful precision, "I will always see you," Not just look at you, but really see you, I promise. And this time I will keep that promise every single day. Sophie studied her mother's face with the solemn assessment only children can truly manage, searching for truth beyond the words. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded once decisively before signing, I believe you. Now we both need to learn, me to trust your promises, you to keep them. The wisdom from her 6-year-old daughter humbled Diana completely. Out of the mouths of babes came the simplest, most profound truths, the foundations upon which all meaningful relationships were built. Trust and promise. Seeing and believing. The language of the heart transcending all barriers of sound and silence.